so I think, when you talk to the baby, you can try, you're really doing it for you, right? You're doing it for you to rehearse the story. But as a child gets older, I think it's good to look at this developmentally. So I have some information on my website on www.familybuilding.net. There's lots of information on developmental issues for donor-conceived children. But basically what we're thinking about is starting general and then becoming more specific developmentally.
I actually have your book. I'm going to just post it, but it's called My Life Book, a Pre-Baby Book, a place to capture special memories and mementos from your journey to have a child. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd love to. So there are a lot of books and ways to talk to children. And I think going from general to specific is best. You're looking at very general ways to tell a story. And then more specific as the child gets a little bit older. I think it's good to start with a little diversity training, really starting a foundation of telling your child that there's all different ways to have a family. Sometimes you have two moms, sometimes you have one dad, sometimes you live in an apartment, sometimes you live in a house. You're really trying to start this foundation of helping your child understand there's lots of ways to build a family. And then as you go further, you talk about more specifics about ovum donation or about surrogacy. Mm-hmm. My book is a book that will be personal. So there are lots of different books to talk about egg or sperm donation, about surrogacy, and different ways to build a family. But I find that it's very nice for children to have their own book as well. And my book is created to chronicle a parent's journey to have a child. And so you will put some information in there about your journey, about your donor, information about your clinic. You'll write things that maybe you'll forget later. But I find that it's really nice for children. I see a lot of children who are donor conceived as they get older. I do workshops for children who are donor conceived, and I find that they like to have their own story as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What about friends and family? So the question is, should parents tell their friends and family? I mean, how do you navigate that? I'll let you answer that.
I think that's a very tricky situation, because while I think it's helpful to think about openness, it's also most important to think about the child's well-being. So parents might have this moral, ethical idea about openness or privacy.
Yep.
People have all different ideas about what they feel, but I think ultimately we want to think first about the child's well-being. And so if you have family members or friends who might be judgmental or critical, who are going to make you uncomfortable, who might judge the child, who are going to treat the child differently, I think it's better probably not to tell them. You can always tell them later, and then once they know, they're already in love with your child. If they know before you have the baby, it can be a little difficult because they may look at the child differently. But if they fall in love with the child first, they already love the baby. And once they find out, it's kind of too late.
So what should parents tell their donor? And sorry, getting back to that last question, there's a lot more we can talk about that. And I think actually that's a good workshop for another webinar. But what do parents tell the children about their donor? What do you recommend?
Well, there are open programs in the country. I work with a clinic that runs an open program, and I've worked at several clinics with different types of programs. So it really depends upon what your relationship is with your donor, if you have an open or closed relationship. But regardless of what your relationship is like, the most important thing is to speak positively about your donor. It's very hard to feel comfortable for many families with their donor conceived information and to talk about their donor in a positive light. But it's really important to remember that while your child will feel like you're the parents 100%, right? Mom likes vanilla ice cream and dad likes to bike ride. I like vanilla ice cream and I like to bike ride, so I'm just like both of my parents. Maybe I'm also musical, and where does that come from? So whether your child feels like the donor is 20% of them or 2% of them, there is some part of them that's going to feel connected to someplace else, and you want that other place to also feel good. You want that to be valuable and feel good as well, so, because that's inside of them.
What do you recommend to parents how do they refer to their donor? You know, the media is full of, and drives us crazy because the media is full of, you know, the birth mother, and that's for surrogacy, but the donor mother. I mean,
Yes.
what is or if we're talking about a sperm donor, what is the relationship?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point, Michelle. I'm so glad you brought it up. And I think that I find that for European families and also gay families, sometimes they're more likely to call the donor the surrogate mother, or the surrogate mother, or the donor mother. I think it's important that everyone takes pride in their family, the way they create their family. And if you're a gay couple and there's no mom, that's fine. You have two parents or you have one parent, and that's how you built your family. And I think it's really important to start your family thinking positively about how you built your family and not being apologetic for not having that other parent. The donor is not going to be the mom. The surrogate's not going to be the mom. So I think it's important to call them either by name if you have an open relationship, or you can call them the donor or the surrogate. Now, that doesn't mean they're not important. They're vitally important because they helped bring this family into the world, but they're not the mom and they're not going to parent the child.
And okay, that gets me to another question about donor siblings. Sometimes they call them siblings. I mean, there's so many. Yeah, is that a valid term? Do you agree with that term, or?
Yeah, I think it is complicated. I like the idea of diblings instead of donor-related siblings, but it's hard for people to remember that and to think about it. But yes, I would prefer that.
So there's a lot to discuss. So how does a parent, let's get back to when you're talking to your child, how does the parent bring it up with the child?
Over time?
Yeah, so how do you start the conversation? Let's say you didn't talk to your child when they're a baby. What do you do?
So it really depends on the age. And, again, I have information about different developmental stages and how to talk to your child at different stages of their life. But it really depends on the child. The most important aspect of it is that you speak positively about the donor, that you speak positively about your experience, and that you really try to the best of your ability, and it's not always easy, not to think that your child is going to feel the same way you do. You know, your child did not go through infertility. Your child did not go through surrogacy. Your child did not go through any of this. And you might be carrying around some of your feelings of your journey or the infertility, and you may feel that the child really wants a lot of information, or that they really are concerned about it. What's important is to give your child some information and let them explore with you. All children, just like adults, are different, and we talk about this in our Tip Top workshops, which is the workshop I was talking about for donor-conceived children. That one aspect of this is the child's personality. You know, some kids are soapbox kids just like adults. They want to get up in the world and tell everybody everything, and some kids are more private. And so we don't want to assume that our children are feeling the same way we do. So we can start the conversation very slowly in a way that's age appropriate, developmentally appropriate, in a very positive way, and give them just a small amount of information to start and see how they feel about it, and let them start to ask questions as they feel comfortable.
Right. Actually, we had somebody emailed me a question, which was, how do you discuss within the family when one child is from a donor and the other is not? So we're talking about probably secondary infertility. How do you balance that with, you know?
Well, it is difficult. Again, if we look back, what our goal is what's in the best interest of the child. So let's say you're in a family where you are open with your neighbors and you're open with your friends, and everyone is talking about it very openly and is very comfortable about it. Then I think in that circumstance, it's fine to speak openly with a sibling. However, if you're not in a situation like that, and you're not speaking openly with friends and family, and everybody is just very open about it, then there are some arguments about thinking about, well, do we really want to share this information with other people before we tell our child? You know, I think, years ago, there was a celebrity who had donor-conceived children, and she didn't admit that she had donor-conceived children right away. She talked about her IVF struggles, and then later she talked about donor conception. And when she was asked by People magazine or whoever it was, why didn't you tell us earlier? She said, I didn't want to tell the world before my child knew.
Right. It's your child's story. This is what we always say, you know, when people say, well, why don't these celebrities just come out and tell it? Well, it's, first of all, it's a private thing. And also it's their child's story. We're shifting from the infertility story to the child's story.
Yes.
Whoops. Actually, we had another question, which was, how can you best explain to your child why you chose an anonymous donor when they feel that you have deprived them of their heritage and identity? And I'm wondering if that's someone who's maybe they didn't have the conversation with the child earlier on. So, and I just want to say something, because when there's no such thing as an anonymity, I think in our industry, we're now saying that to people with 23andMe, all the DNA genetic testing, you can't assume that any donation is going to be anonymous. Eventually it might be known. So how do you talk about identity and heritage?
Yes. Well, I think that's great to highlight, Michelle. Obviously, people who are coming to this webinar are probably thinking about that already, but I think it is good to highlight that the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which you and I are both a part, is kind of the governing body for fertility clinics in this country, and they're a conservative organization, and they've issued a statement saying there's no such thing as anonymity, right? Because facial recognition on Facebook. There's no way to be anonymous in this day and age. Not to mention the fact that there is no regulation. Even if you are going to an agency or going to a place, going to a clinic where you feel that your donor has only donated a couple of times, there's no guarantee that that will be true. Your donor can go to an egg bank and donate a few more times, and go someplace else and donate a few more times. There's no way to track it. And so your donor will have these siblings, donor-conceived siblings, and you certainly don't want them to marry any of them. It's not, people say, oh, it's extremely unlikely, but right here in Westchester, in a very small town, there was a paper published some years ago about two families who used IVF and used the same donor, and then by sheer coincidence, they used the same sperm donor. And it's a very small town that they live in. Wow. These two kids are in kindergarten together, and hopefully they don't go to the prom together, right? So we want our children to be prepared, and the best way to be prepared is for them to know. And if they meet somebody who they think is donor conceived as well, all it takes is a little swab of the inside of their cheek, which they're doing in high school now anyway.
So, okay, you've frozen a little bit.
You're genetically related. So, yes.
I was going to say, but the question is, you know, if it was anonymous and they want to know more about the donor, but you can't find the information, say the donor never does a DNA, like how do they find out more about their background and it's an identity issue, really.
So I think in talking to the child, you share with the child however you felt in the moment. You know, this was the best donor that we can find, and she happened to be anonymous, and we're sorry about that. I know that might be disappointing to you, and at some point, if you'd like to explore, we can talk about that. As a child gets older, it's going to be important for them to know that maybe the donor doesn't want to be found, and then the parents will have to be prepared for that, to help their child navigate that, and maybe receive some counseling about how to talk to the child about being prepared for that possibility. The parents might be able to say, well, we chose an anonymous donor because that's the only choice we had.
Some clinics only allow, I mean, there's so many different things. I think you have to decide before you even go through the process, don't you, how you feel about it.
Yes. Yeah. But some people really choose an anonymous donor because that happens to be the donor they thought would be the best suited for their family. Maybe because the genetics were right, maybe because the donor resembled the mom, for a number of reasons. And so if you have an open donor, it's like, even if she says she's willing to be contacted in 20 years, there's no way you can control that, right? And if you have an anonymous donor, it doesn't mean she won't want to be contacted. She might want to be contacted at some point. We're all different at 20 than we are at 40.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Actually, that leads me on to another question, which is, as children get older, what happens when children get older? Do they want to tell, and they want to tell other people? Like, how how do you, Lisa, as a mental health therapist and director of the Center for Family Building, what do you guys do to help families and children navigate that?
Well, we do individual coaching and counseling, so that's a choice. We also do workshops. We have this Tip Top workshop, which was written about, and I can send you information on it. But it's a really great workshop that helps children understand how to communicate their donor information to friends and family in a way that's helpful for them. And we help the children experience what it would be like. We help them role play, we talk about their feelings, we give them acronyms and different modalities to manage that information and practice in ways that will be helpful. And then we also educate the parents so that the parents can be the child's ally in their exploration of themselves and in their disclosure considerations.
So is it grouped by age group then during the program? Do they do workshops by age?
Yes, so we do workshops that include children all the way from 5 until high school, and we usually group them into about 3 groups depending upon who the attendees are, because the way that we teach them are different. We have different activities for each group of children. I
guess too, I would imagine that kids need to help navigating how to talk to their friends in their school about it, you know. Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of, for instance, European couples clients that come to us are very concerned about blood type, because they know that in school in Europe, they study blood type. So they know that if they do the blood type, they're going to either find out or they're going to have to explain it. So how does it work, you know, do you talk about things like that in the Tip Top program?
Mm-hmm. Yes, because, you know, every child is going to be curious about, where did I come from? Whose tummy did I grow in? All of that. Children talk about that amongst themselves. And a child might be interested when they're young in talking about it. A lot of children are not interested in talking about it with their friends and family. And the parents need to be respectful of that. You know, even though, you know, we're talking a lot about how to talk to your child and what that's going to be like and how that's going to develop over time, at some point, this is going to be the child's story to tell or not to tell, right? And the child might say to their parents, hey, you know, I don't want to tell my Aunt Sally, or I want to tell the doctor myself. And so what we do is try to prepare the children based upon several variables. We look at, first, help them understand their feelings, because they need to understand what makes them anxious, what makes them sad, what makes them happy. Then we start to look at how they understand their donor information, is the second point. And then we help them understand how they feel about the audience. So they may talk differently to their best friend than they do to their pediatrician. And we help them put this all together we have a whole curriculum that we do in one day, and we really help them put that together, and we help them bring those materials home so they can use them over time.
And we had a question, assuming parents have told the child about donor conception from the beginning, how do you help parents talk to the child about sharing the information with their peers? So like a preschooler going to school and saying, you know, I didn't come out of my mommy's tummy, or my mommy isn't related to me, something like that. How do you, the question is that they're curious about the consequences with their peers and the peers' parents, you know, mm-hmm. schoolyard gossips and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the parents are usually more nervous about that sort of thing than they have to be, because it doesn't often happen that way. Usually children don't go around talking about it so openly because this is their private information. I think they like to look at their life book sometimes when they're alone in their room, or sometimes they'll share it with their best friend. But I think often children don't often do that. But if they do, again, I think within the Tip Top workshop, we look at several different variables, but in terms of thinking about talking to your child privately, I think it's always important to think about those 3 considerations I mentioned. One is your child's temperament, who they are, how they feel about things. You know, are they a private person, or are they an anxious person? You know, that really is important, because it's not going to be the same for every child, right? Then the second part is, How do they feel about their donor conception information? You know, children feel very differently about it. I know twins who that I've worked with, you know, several times, who both of them feel so differently about their donor information, right? And so that's the second part. And then third part is the audience. And do they want to talk to the best friend? Is there, you know, a teenage girl who wants to tell her boyfriend? Does somebody want to talk to their teacher about it? So I think all three of those pieces need to be taken into consideration.
Right, and it might not be as you say, it might not be as big of a deal to them. You know, it's just it's not the only part of them, just because that's just one little part of them as a person, right?
Mm-hmm. But to everybody, it's different, right? Like these twins I'm mentioning, one of them, it's very important to her, and she can't wait to do the 23andMe, and she's, and this is really important, she wants to know everything about her donor. And the other twin says, oh, it doesn't matter to me. You know, if I find out, I find out. If I don't care. And she doesn't talk to anybody about it. So, and these are twins.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to take all three of those pieces into consideration.
We're actually getting to the end of it, but I wanted to say, like, you're based in New York and your workshop's in New York. So what happens with, we have clients and listeners from all over the world and the US. So how can they find out more? I know I was going to say that, Lisa, we will send everybody a free ebook of the Tip Top program.
Yes, thank you for mentioning it.
What else can they do if they're not sort of able to come to your workshops?
Yeah, so thank you for mentioning that. Yes, anyone who comes to this webinar can just email me at lisa@familybuilding.net, and I will send them a free ebook on my Tip Top workshop. But I can do a workshop via Skype or Zoom, as we're doing now. I can certainly send information to, you know, anyone. I have several ebooks. I will be sending out very soon another ebook that's called 10 Things Donor Conceived Children Want Their Parents to Know. I'll be sending that out soon, so if people join my mailing list, I'll have that. And the other thing is I do have a video series on donor conceived child and developmental stages for them. So anyone can access that training around the world by just buying that on the website and downloading that onto their computer.
That's great. That's great. Lisa, I wish we could talk for hours. I know there's lots more things that we could talk about, but I really wanted to thank you. It's so important. It's a question we always get at Donor Concierge, is the question of anonymous versus, you know, open. You know, a lot of our clients want to talk to their donor beforehand, and I think that if we start from the very beginning, before they even get the journey and before they even start their fertility journey through donor conception, you know, having this information is really important. So thank you.
Hundreds of people in the last 2 decades that I've been working in this industry, and I can see one person at a time. But, you know, being able to offer this information to people on a wider scale is something that I wish I had when I was going through my infertility journey, and I really hope that it'll help others as well.